Good morning and welcome to the Georgia Gang on this Sunday, January 18th. The 2026 legislative session is underway as Governor Brian Kemp gives his final State of the State address. Also, Fulton County taxpayers could be on the hook for millions of dollars after the election interference case fell apart. And another deadly fight breaks out at a Georgia prison, leaving 3 inmates dead, 13 others injured. Melita, Brian, and Martha are all here. Alicia Thomas-Searcy is filling in for Theron. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Governor Brian Kemp delivered his final State of the State address on Thursday, outlining his budget proposals and priorities for his last year in office. He announced a $2,000 bonus for state employees, along with tax cuts to all Georgians.
And the reality is that too many of our citizens are still struggling to make ends meet each and every day because costs are still too high. Groceries, rent, insurance, clothes for the kids, it all adds up to more than it used to. That's why my budget proposal will include a fourth one-time $1 billion tax rebate this year that will return or save the average filer $250 and a married couple up to $500.
The governor also wants to put in a one-time endowment of $325 million into a scholarship fund for Georgia's public universities for dream scholarships that are needs-based rather than tied to merit like the Hope Scholarship. Martha, we'll start with you this week. He packed a lot in.
He did, and my favorite one was the needs-based scholarships. You know, I was one of those kids when I went to the University of Georgia and it wasn't there at that time, and my mom used to have to borrow the money at the beginning of the quarter to pay it, so I have a real heart for that. So that was number one for me, but I thought his talk about taxes, because you know there's a million tax proposals out there, he made it very clear where he was, which is just continuing in this very conservative way of reducing taxes, and also talked about infrastructure, which was huge, $2 billion in infrastructure, which the number one complaint next to what people are paying for things is how hard it is to get around everywhere. So I think all in all it was a good speech. It was backward looking and forward looking, which is hard to do in your last speech.
Alicia, anything for the Democrats to argue with here? You're talking about tax cuts, needs-based scholarships.
Of course there is. And I do like the Dream Scholarship. I think that's great. And I think Democrats have been talking about that for a long time, so it's really important. And it's nice and bipartisan. There was not a lot on education, so I'm concerned about that, right? We've got an issue with our education funding and making it more equitable. I'm also grateful for the transportation funding, so shout out to the folks in Henry County. The problem that I'm having, though, is all of this talk about affordability. And the governor talked about how it's hard for folks to make ends meet. I'm not sure $250 is really going to make a difference when folks are paying 30% more for health insurance. Child care costs are out the roof. And so I think Republicans just have to do more. And when you're sitting on a $10 billion reserve, there's more that can be done to help Georgia's families.
Okay, $250 for singles, $500 for married filers. Brian.
Well, I think most Georgians are going to begin to think that that's just simply an entitlement because we get it every year under Republican leadership. We get that money put back in our account. This is something that Democrats should love because it really does benefit the working Georgians the most because they get a higher percentage of what they paid back in that refund. I'm going to be interested to see what Kemp does with the competing House and Senate tax plans. As Martha mentioned, we can't do all of these things. So we're going to have to pick and choose. He has a bully pulpit that is unmatched there at the Capitol. And if he comes in and says, hey, we all want tax relief for Georgians, we're all concerned about affordability, all want to give Georgians a raise by lowering their taxes, but if you do this, I'm going to veto it, I think he will quickly narrow what the legislators talk about in this session and could prevent a lot of wasted time. Whether or not he'll do that, I don't know. Super excited about the needs-based scholarship. I do want everyone to understand, though, a merit-based scholarship has an immediate return on investment. Those kids graduate, they get jobs, they're more likely to stay in Georgia. Georgia colleges have become much more elite because of Hope's merit-based approach. Needs-based kids need wraparound services or we're going to lose that investment. We need to make sure that they get health care. We need to make sure that they get mental health access. We need to make sure that they have some place to live and that they have food. No, because I don't want to waste my tax dollars on a scholarship where we get no return on investment. I want those kids to graduate. I don't want them to have to go home because their mom's unemployed. I want them to be able to do that and get their money back and get our money back.
And very quickly, shout out to the University of Georgia. They're already doing that with their needs-based scholarships that they have. It's not just a needs-based scholarship. They have those wraparound services. They're funding it through the annual fund and other things. But this is going to be a huge help for schools that aren't as big as the University of Georgia to be able to do that kind of thing.
Well, and what I want to make sure is that, because what we see too often statistically these are high achieving kids who've worked hard, who've done the right thing, and by God, I want opportunity for them more than anything. And I want to make sure that after that first year they don't wash out, because statistically that's very normal.
It's real.
That's a great plug for the Fostering Success Act. They provide the wraparound services for the foster kids who have aged out of care, who are in an education, a secondary education. So
yeah, it's expensive.
That's a great example.
No, I'm not.
Right?
I want a return on investment of tax dollars. That is very conservative.
Yes.
All right, Melina.
Well, I love what you've just said, so I'm going to agree with you since you're sitting next to me. But speaking of foster children, there was nothing in the remarks that addresses the crisis in foster care that this state is now experiencing, and I hope that legislators will step up to find a way to do that. And it did not address the expansion of the expiration of the Affordable Care Act subsidies, which means 1.4 million Georgians will no longer be under that program, and the state needs to step up and do something, because we've long ignored expanding Medicaid. And then I just really again echo the whole Dreamers Scholarship thing. I thought it was very sweet that it brought Representative Stacey Evans, who was a recipient of similar scholarships, to tears during the governor's speech. But I want to note that this program calls on more than $1 billion being raised from private philanthropy to match the state contribution. So there's still going to be quite a battle to make it fully functional.
I think the business community will step up, though. They're going to need workforce, so we'll see.
It is an investment in workforce.
Yes.
Michael Patrick, who's an executive at Chick-fil-A, tried to do this same approach with the REACH Scholarship, a needs-based program established under Governor Deal. He sort of laid the vision out. I think this is building on Michael Patrick's vision.
All right, good.
Well, and I think we should also commend the one-time $2,000 pay supplement for state employees,
Yes.
including the teachers and law enforcement.
All right, Brian, I want to go back to you, because we were at the Eggs and Issues breakfast. We won't talk about how hard it was to get into the Eggs and Issues breakfast and the traffic and the lines and all of that. But I thought it was really interesting, because Speaker Burns really talked a lot when he laid out his vision about property tax cuts, right? And he went in depth laying out his case. And then the Lieutenant Governor gets on stage and he says, wow, I'm so thankful the House has finally followed in our footsteps on property tax cuts. I just thought it was a little early. At an Eggs and Issues breakfast, which is a very cordial event, but I thought it was a little early for such a kind of a shot taken at the Speaker and the House.
Well, and let's not forget that just the week before, Speaker Burns at his pre-session news conference was asked about relationships with Lieutenant Governor Burns over Burns closing the session down early without talking to Burns about it last year. And Burns was like, bygones. We're looking forward. We're going to work together for the good of Georgia. And then to come back the next week certainly sends the wrong signal. And believe me, it's heard on the House side for sure. And what Burns has said on that property tax is a great line. You shouldn't have to pay rent to the government for your primary home. I think that's something that will resonate with Georgians. When you talk to Georgians, it is that property tax that has gone up the most for all of us, and that's where you're hearing the squealing from the taxpayers the most.
But that's consistent with the Lieutenant Governor's bullying behavior at times, the way he poked the Speaker.
Well, and one of the things that also Speaker Burns talked about was education. He spent a lot of time talking about education and about the things regarding literacy, because what we've seen happen in Mississippi especially is something that we've got to model. And I'm on the State Board of Education. We talk about it all the time, and the literacy coaches. But the other thing that's very interesting, this study has come about, that all this focus on screeners and all this digital stuff has really not helped kids. And we're starting to dig into this kind of these studies that are out there, because you think it helps kids, but really a great teacher in a classroom that teaches a child is better than any kind of digital thing that you can use.
With phonics and old school math.
Yes, absolutely.
Right, Alicia?
And really quickly, we've got to talk about Mississippi, right? They went from 49 to 9th in this country for reading. Where I would disagree, though, Martha, is that our legislation in Georgia has been very piecemeal when it comes to literacy. It's not very consistent. In my opinion, we've not had leadership from the superintendent of education or the governor on literacy and making this work. We do need to invest in teachers. I agree with you, starting with in our schools of education and ensuring that they are prepared to teach reading. That's not something we do effectively in this state, and we're not investing enough in actual coaches to again teach teachers who are in classrooms right now.
And that was part of Speaker Burns' proposal, the coaches.
And we put a little money there, but not enough. And the way Mississippi has been successful is that they've invested in those two things.
You know, we've seen this in the city of Marietta Schools, very close to Alicia's home. The coaches approach a focus on literacy in the morning when kids are more attuned. They begin to lose energy at the end of the day. There are numerous tactics that we know work that have empirical data to support them. And look, this is Speaker Burns' heart. He believes in opportunity for Georgia children. He wants them to all have that chance. We don't want to guarantee outcomes. We want to guarantee opportunity. This is part of that.
And his wife.
Mrs. Dale is a important voice. She's a former principal, lifelong educator.
Mrs. Burns.
Mrs. Burns, Mrs. Dale, as she's known universally, is a major force behind this policy.
Well, and I think it's important to note that we'll be hearing during budget hearings next week from all the State Department heads, including the school superintendent, and the budget fight will continue for weeks ahead.
Yes, it will, and we'll be following it. Up next, the collapse of the Fulton County election interference case could be costly to taxpayers. We'll discuss next.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
The fallout from the collapsed Georgia election interference case is really turning costly. Under a new state law, the Fulton County DA's office could be forced to pay nearly $17 million to Donald Trump and several co-defendants, reimbursing them for legal fees and other court costs after the case was dismissed. Martha, President Trump is asking for $6 million alone, and this is all because of that new law that was passed last legislative session.
Yeah, I mean, the case has collapsed. It didn't end up, impacting anything that happened. I think they ought to leave it alone as far as money's concerned, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Oh no, Melita?
Well, you've got 5 of the defendants who are asking for more than $1 million in legal fees each, and then the figure for the president is $6 million, and that's a lot of money for a case that never went to trial, never went in front of a jury. So I think the dissent in the judicial ruling was very interesting because it talked about the fact that that this was a case that had been in front, for years that they had investigated. So they're asking to make a case in front of the judge against the legal fees. And so it'll be interesting to see what the judge decides about whether to give a hearing to the DA about the legal fees. And it'll be interesting to see if the legal fees go maybe to arbitration instead of just outright paying the amount asked for.
Brian.
There's often a penalty affixed to doing something that is wrong-headed. And this was wrong-headed from the very beginning. This prosecution should never have been brought. Why does it cost so much? Because these things cost a lot. Lawyers cost a lot of money. And this, as you said, stretched out of a period of years. So of course these costs are going to be really high. I do think that this will have a chilling effect on future political prosecutions in this state. And I also think, as I said last year when we passed it, that this is a genie in the bottle that is now out of the bottle, and the legislature needs to make sure that we're not going to have unintended consequences because these bills could get really high. The judiciary needs to be able to step in and create some kind of guardrails for the cost to taxpayers.
Alicia.
I think this is the best example I can think of in recent time of politics and how the process is completely broken. You have people who have broken the law. They tried to overturn an election. Some of them pled guilty. And now somehow taxpayers are on the hook.
Allegedly. Because
they
pled guilty. Some of them did, but not all of them.
Right. But the ones who pled guilty, then there are others. All of them were involved in this. I read that very long indictment. It's troubling in a lot of ways. But the bottom line is my concern is the fact that we're putting taxpayers on the hook for paying these very expensive legal bills, and it's just not fair. It's unjust and it's unfair.
Well, I mean, that's why this case should never been brought in the first place. You guys get sick of me making the point of they spend all the time and effort on this case instead of real criminal cases that were happening to citizens of Fulton County, like rapes and assaults and that kind of stuff. I think it should have never been brought, and there were people of Fulton County that are hurt twice now.
Real quick, because I want to move on.
But there was an investigative grand jury followed by a grand jury which returned the indictments. So there are citizens of Fulton County who thought the case had merits.
Okay, we'll leave it there, folks. Georgia is getting a major boost to rural health care, but not as much as state leaders hoped. The federal government has awarded the state $219 million in the first year of a new 5-year program, forcing the Georgia Department of Community Health to scale back plans tied to its original $1.4 billion request. Brian, when Georgians hear $219 million, should they be relieved or concerned?
Look, let's look at how these programs are implemented. One of them is going to be this telehealth program using satellite technology that's going to provide some efficiencies into a rural healthcare system that is inherently inefficient because there are not enough people to support the infrastructure that is really needed, particularly in an emergency. If you're having a heart attack, having a stroke. Not that telehealth is what you need when you have a stroke. But hopefully we can get some preventative care, some routine maintenance done for people in rural areas through these reforms. We should always be concerned because any investment when it comes to our rural healthcare system is going to be a drop in the bucket. This is a massive need, and it's going to be a very expensive one. There's no easy, cheap way out of providing these services.
Alicia, will this move the needle?
No, it will in some ways. To your point, it's an even smaller drop in the bucket when at the same time there are federal cuts to Medicaid. And we know how important Medicaid funds are to make sure rural hospitals can be open. And I felt this a few weeks ago. I was in rural Georgia, had a family member who was sick. We drove around for almost an hour trying to find her medical care. And it was frustrating. And so I can only imagine, and I thought in that moment, this is what people deal with in rural Georgia when they need medical care. And she wasn't even in a serious situation. So my heart breaks for the conditions that rural Georgians are facing, and I just don't think this is enough.
Martha?
Well, I mean, I know one of the things we're doing in the schools is that they're putting more clinics around in schools. There are about 20 counties that don't have pediatricians, but we have school nurses in those schools. And so there is some work being done. It's not enough. I agree with Brian that there's, it's such a huge problem in rural areas. But then the other areas, how do you get people to go and want to practice there? That's a challenge too. And we have increased, and they talked about this in the State of the State, the number of residencies. And that's what's got to happen. For too many years, we didn't increase the number of doctors we were turning out, nurse practitioners, that kind of thing. So how could you expect to have more providers and going to more places? So we're starting to do that too, but we're behind the 8 ball, no doubt.
Well, the phrase drop in a bucket, let's look at what that really means. All the states, this grant for Georgia is part of $50 billion that is designed to replace $1 trillion in permanent cuts to health care from this administration. So that's what we mean by a drop in the bucket.
Okay, we'll leave it there, folks. Coming up, more deadly violence in the state prison system. We'll discuss after the break.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
The Georgia Department of Corrections reports deadly violence at Washington State Prison. A fight left 3 inmates dead, 13 others injured, along with a corrections officer. Officials say the incident appears to be gang-related and comes amid ongoing concerns about staffing shortages inside Georgia prisons. Melita, we've discussed this issue several times here on the Georgia Gang, but it doesn't appear to be getting any better.
That's true. I mean, this particular prison has been particularly badly understaffed. July figures showed that 72% of staff positions authorized were vacant. I thought it was very interesting that the aunt of one of those who was killed in this particular incident found out from a fellow prisoner using a contraband cell phone before she got the call from the warden. That tells you a little bit about who's in charge in these prisons. And, it's really, it was described by one group as a state of normalized crisis. And that should not be the case. And this rose to the level of being a very serious collective violence or a riot. To have 3 people die and so many people being injured. And this is something that the state legislature needs to fix. And there is money in the budget and money in the surplus to fix it, and it needs to happen.
And that has happened, and there's still implementation to be done. Last year, the legislature took this very seriously. We have amongst the deadliest prisons in the nation here in Georgia. We have 1,000 guard shortage in the system. Of course you're going to have problems. But last year, the legislature and Governor Kemp put in $600 million. And in a state budget, let me tell you, that is a lot of money. That is a massive commitment to addressing this issue. But part of the thing is the commissioner says it's going to take years just to replace the locks on the doors. So apparently there is a lot of free access within these prisons because the doors aren't locked, and it just takes a long time to do it. I'm not sure why, but apparently it does. That's what they say. It's going to take years to get all these locks replaced.
Why would it take years? I don't understand.
I don't get that either.
You can hire a SWAT team to go in and do just about anything with the right amount of money.
I have no idea what that means, but $600 million should be enough to get new blood in there, not poor choice of words, to get new leadership in there amongst the guards, to get the personnel that is needed, and to create the security protocols and infrastructure you need to keep the people in there and the surrounding community safe.
All right, I want to move on because a federal appeals court has dealt a setback to opponents of the Atlanta Police Training Facility. According to WABE, the divided three-judge panel ruled that the plaintiffs in the case cannot use the petition and referendum process to repeal the city ordinance that allows Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens to lease almost 400 acres to the Atlanta Police Foundation for the new training center. But attorneys for the opponents say that this legal fight is still not over, Alicia. Even though it's built, it's open, it's training.
Yeah, I don't get it, right? I respect process and the law and people's right to be able to fight and prolong this, and so I won't speak to that. But I will say, many of us went to visit the training center, and I just want to encourage people in the community to go and visit. I was highly impressed with the thoughtfulness in the creation of this center, how Atlanta Police and Fire collaborate in training. Community rooms. I think my favorite part was this very open mental health space for public safety officials to go and visit. And so I think if people just spend some time to go take a visit, understand what's actually happening there, the fact that they're calling it a cop city, I think is a gross misnomer. And we just need to go and see, and I think your minds will change.
Martha.
I mean, they've done such great work there. And you got to remind people there was already a police training facility there that had gotten into disrepair. People forget that. That land was sort of set aside for that purpose for a very long time. And you're right, it seems like these people just can't accept that they have lost. I mean, they've definitely used every avenue, that they've got. And at some point, I guess a judge is just going to have to say, okay, this is the last and final. I don't know if you can do that or not, but it seems like it needs to do that.
Well, but the thing is how this case sets a precedent for future petitions of a similar nature and where the line is drawn for how those petitions happen. I mean, the dissenting opinion said that even if the plaintiffs, it's a fool's errand, it's a fool errand to which the First Amendment entitles them. So it's a matter of precedent that they're continuing the fight to establish when this kind of petition can be used in the future.
Final word, Brian?
This just needs to be over. They're doing great. I hear you, but those folks have just been in such a barrier to progress and wasted a lot of money.
All right, coming up, winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
All right, Alicia, we'll start with you.
Thank you. I'm going to go really fast. Carlotta Harrell in Henry County, congratulations to you and Henry County for this great investment that the governor is making or proposing to make on the road project. Shout out to Cedric and Jackie Brown of Powder Springs. Thank you for being viewers of our show every single week. Shout out to the ladies of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. It was our Founders Day this week, and happy to celebrate with you. And then finally, I do want to make those masked ICE agents my loser of the week for terrorizing this country. We have to do better.
All right, Martha.
I want to remember Dr. Martin Luther King, who will be celebrating his birthday on Monday. He was the greatest Georgian, I think, to ever live, and maybe the greatest American to ever live. I'm not sure, but I want to remember him. My winner is Governor Kemp for his great speech for the state. Loser is Minority Leader Carolyn Hughley for not finding one good thing to say about the speech. And then John Ossoff sent out a fundraising letter with a lot of profanity in it on Friday. That's disappointing to me. If you want to change the tone, you got to start with yourself.
All right, Melita.
My winners this week are the Girl Scouts, like my granddaughter, who are knocking on neighborhood doors and making online pitches to pre-order Girl Scout cookies. You can expect a cookie booth near you on Super Bowl Sunday and the deliveries in mid-February.
All right, we'll be ordering them. Brian?
My winner is Martha and my friend Butch Miller, who served Gainesville for a long time in the state Senate. He's the Honda dealer up there in Gainesville, and he's the #1 dealer in the state for Hondas. And he was chosen by Honda to be the first new version of the Honda dealerships around the country. So $20 million investment in that new dealership in Gainesville, the new branding for Honda. He's going to be the first east of Mississippi to have this new style of dealership.
All right, good commercial for him. Thanks. Make it a great one. See you next week, everyone.